Global conflict update from Ukraine to Syria with attorney Andy Semotiuk. That is our topic for today. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International show and podcast, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer as cases are fact dependent. Hey everyone, this is attorney Mac Pierre-Louis, lawyer, mediator, arbitrator, and I work throughout Florida and Texas. And with me today, I have a guest who's back to talk more about global affairs, and that is attorney Andy Semotiuk. Andy, how are you doing?
Fantastic. Glad to be with you here today.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for coming back again. And so we were starting to make this kind of a routine because you have so much knowledge when it comes to global affairs, global relations, immigration, the law. It's great to have you come and talk to the folks about what's going on current events wise, especially when it comes to the war in Ukraine and Russia and what's going on now in the Middle East. Lots of hotspots around the world. But a little bit about yourself, just for folks who may not be familiar with you. You are an attorney licensed in the US and in Canada, specifically in California, New York, Ontario, British Columbia. And you were a correspondent for the UN, with the UN for years. And you are currently, and you have been for the last decade, a contributor for Forbes. And so you've been publishing, and I know you've written some books as well. I think, did you add a kid's book as well?
Correct. I have
Yes.
a cute joke book for kids.
Exactly. And so, jack of all trades, right? Lots of different things when it comes to literature and
Sure.
literacy. And so it's good to have you on, and let's talk more about the topic. But I will screen share a couple of things. One is your law firm, the Pace Law. That's where you do your immigration work. So for folks who have an interest in anything involving immigration, check out the Pace Law Firm. The other one is your Forbes page, where there's a link. This is a link to all of your different articles that you've published going back in time. And your most recent one, of course, is on the US's deportation plans under the incoming President-elect Donald Trump. And so folks can check those articles out if they are interested. And so that's immigration. But let's focus our time now for the next 20 minutes on what's going on globally. So, first things first, can you kind of give us a status since we've last spoken about global affairs and what's going on specifically when it comes to Ukraine and Russia, and now what's happening in Syria?
Sure. Well, a key factor is the fact that Donald Trump won the election and is about to take office as President of the United States, which signals a change in international relations pertaining to the United States and its influence, both in Eastern Europe, but also in the Middle East. Taking the Eastern European part first, there's this continuing war, Russia invading Ukraine. It's now in its third year. There's not a stalemate, but there's it seems like little progress being made on the ground, a few meters here and there or whatever, kilometers, but no great breakthroughs. There have been some spectacular events in that war, such as, for example, Russia shooting a new missile that travels at 3 times the speed of sound at Dnipro. And I just happened to talk to some people from Ukraine who came in and talked to me about this huge strike from Moscow, and how it's impossible to shoot these missiles down because they're so fast and they're huge in terms of size. But it's not, that's one missile. They shot one missile so far along those lines. The key problem in Ukraine, generally in terms of dangers, is the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant, which is the largest plant in Europe, and right now under Russian domination. And the fear is that if things don't go properly, Russia could explode that nuclear power plant, and it would be a dirty bomb, essentially a dirty nuclear bomb that could pollute the environment throughout Europe, in Russia, and so on. That's a big danger on the nuclear front, more so than that Russia will shoot nuclear missiles, even tactical or strategic missiles on Ukraine or NATO or whatever. There's some talk about.
Let me ask you about that dirty bomb idea. It's my first time hearing about that, but do you think that's even remotely likely? Because it seems kind of suicidal, in my opinion. It doesn't seem.
It's true. It would be, I would say, something of last resort that Putin could potentially, go out with. The scenario is changing in Ukraine. Here's an interesting element to the change in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Until now, the American emphasis has been on, that this is a threat to international security because it's the first time since World War II that a nation in Europe has invaded another nation. And it's, a threat to the international rules-based order, that to allow Russia to invade and take advantage of gains that it has made, will set a precedent in terms of how China might deal with Taiwan and North Korea, how things will, how other dictators, for example, might behave because of the precedent being made in Ukraine. That has been, and the Budapest memorandum or accords under which the US, UK, France, China all assure Ukraine that if it surrenders its nuclear arsenal, Ukraine's sovereignty will be respected, including Russia, by the way, that took the nuclear arms, that they would respect that's been the traditional line. An interesting thing that happened is that the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, seeing that Trump has come to power and on his own has come up with what he calls a peace plan, which changes the focus from what I just described to another focus. And the focus here is now that Ukraine is a jewel in terms of the resources that it has and that could be made available to the West. Indeed, it's calculated that within the Ukrainian boundaries, there is something like $27 trillion worth of very valuable resources, oil, minerals, of unique minerals that are needed for space travel and other, like cars and things of that nature. Crimea on its own, the oil and gas reserves that are around on the coast of Crimea are, I think, about $2 trillion. So the dynamic has become, be smart, America, Trump. You're a businessman. Take advantage of these resources that are at your disposal or could be at your disposal to develop them with your partners in Europe, and don't surrender them to China and Russia and allow them to take advantage of this huge cache of resources. And so it's along that line that the discussions are going now. And there is some discussion about a potential peace meeting where they would discuss, what could be done. But the element of peace, this was kind of summarized this whole area, is evasive for Trump because, yes, Trump can apply great pressure on Zelensky and Ukraine to, back off, cut you off from money and weapons and so on. But his leverage when it comes to Putin is nowhere near as great. And you got to wonder, well, how is he going to bring Putin to the table? Uh, Putin, there's a debate going on what Putin wants in Ukraine.
Yeah.
One element of the debate is he wants Kiev, because it's the mother of, in his view, Russia. You know, historically, it's brought Christianity to that part of the world, etc. Or another view is, well, he doesn't care so much about Kyiv. What he cares about is the passageway from what is now seized Ukrainian lands through to Odessa on the south and control over Crimea, as well as the eastern provinces of Ukraine. But either way, there's a territorial element to what does this guy want and what can be obtained in a peace deal where he gets territory in exchange for, again, agreeing that the rest of the territory is going to be protected by securities. And the discussion has been, would the rest of Ukraine be able to join NATO, or at least be invited to an agreement along the lines of joining NATO, with security being provided by NATO countries or NATO soldiers. Anyway, that's an update of what's going on that front.
Well, thank you so much. Couple questions, just to get your thoughts. Do you think that the possibility exists for Ukraine proper, less some of its land to be included into NATO? I heard of Tom Cotton, U.S. Senator, I think from Missouri, recently being interviewed, where he was asked a question: should NATO be, um, you know, opened up to include Ukraine? And he said that's a bad idea. It's going to bring us automatically into a new war, into a hot war. But is that the case? Is it possible that the whole bring Ukraine to NATO thing could be included as part of a peace deal? Kind of imagine Zelensky and Putin go to Camp David with Trump, and out comes this idea where Ukraine now has the protection. It doesn't have to fear anymore that it might be invaded in the future because it's now part of NATO, but at the same time, it's lost territory. Is that conceivably something that might take place?
Hard to say. That's a very, the NATO partners and people like Cotton and others are very, skittish about an idea like that. And Ukraine, from their point of view, the thing is, hey, we had a security guarantee, a multi-party, multi-government security guarantee. And where did that lead us in terms of where we are now? Nuclear proliferation is an element in this discussion also. A while ago, I don't know, a few years ago, Kissinger, Scholz, and a few other former secretaries from the United States, foreign secretary types from the United States, published, I think it was a New York Times article calling for the world to go in the direction of nuclear disarmament, and that the future belongs in that category. Well, Ukraine disarmed and is probably the centerpiece for the argument why you should not disarm, given your exposure. But to direct an answer specifically to your question, there are parties who believe Ukraine should be given, that the closer the country is to Ukraine, the more favorable it is to allowing Ukraine to join NATO. What is, the parts of Ukraine that are not under Russia to start with, and negotiations about the rest of Ukraine. So, for example, Poland, the Baltic states, and so on, Romania, are very close to or willing to consider allowing Ukraine to join. The further away you go from the border over there, the less enthusiastic people are about it. It's debatable. There's several elements of this equation that are debatable. For example, the war in Ukraine, from the Ukrainian point of view, is not about land Russia has all the land it wants. It's
Yeah.
the biggest country in the world in terms of land. It's about people, and the problem is, slaughters behind enemy line. There are 5 million Ukrainians that are behind enemy lines, so to speak, in eastern Ukraine under Russian occupation. 5 million. Anybody who's a patriot or a danger to Russia is in danger, to say the least. So the problem is, if they seal the border and that's what they get, they'll slaughter all those people, or anybody who exhibits any hostility towards Russia and so on. And there's all these children. There's 100,000 Ukrainian children that are all somewhere in Russia, taken away from their parents and told their parents don't want them anymore, and they're trying to turn them into. Anyway,
Okay. No,
that's a
understood.
puzzle that they have to sort out, in one way or another. It may mean that the war will continue. Here's another angle. I'll just throw this one last thing at you.
Yep.
Economically, it appears that Russia is about 6 months away from bankruptcy. I use the term bankruptcy loosely.
Yep.
6 months away from finish. That's it. Economically, the inflation, the economy maybe has about 6 months left. So if Ukraine and the West can hang on for 6 months, it may be that Russia will implode and some other options may come up.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what happened to the Soviet Union, right? I mean,
Yes.
it fell apart under its own weight. It couldn't keep bankrolling, such
Exactly.
military adventures. So, okay. All right. Well, let's connect the dots now to the Middle East, because Russia is also connected
Indeed,
to
it is. Yeah.
Syria. So bring us up to speed. What's going on in Syria?
Okay.
And if you could give us also a little bit of a history lesson, that might be helpful.
Sure. Well, this guy, Bashir al-Assad,
Yeah.
who's been running Syria since 2000, and who went through a civil war and seemed to have won the civil war and ruled Syria ruthlessly as a tyrant, essentially, with Russian backing and Iranian backing through the civil war, including like attacks on hospitals, schools, and so on, where resistance appeared. And there's a whole a group of or a number of sort of resisting organizations. The one that's leading the pack is this thing called Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and HTS for short.
Yeah.
And the guy who's leading them is Abu Muhammad al-Jawani, who initially appeared to be sort of an Al-Qaeda aspirant, a sort of Syrian planted Al-Qaeda guy, and who is not known for his democratic views or respect for human rights or anything of that nature. But his organization seems to be the leading organization that have displanted Assad, to the point where Assad fled and went to Moscow, and I guess is claiming asylum in Moscow.
Yeah.
So we got this new group that has now come to the fore and appears to be leading Syria. There are a number of other groups. There's the Syrian National Army, which is Turkish-backed, and that group it wants to sort of. Turkey doesn't want the Kurds, who are a dominant group in the north of Syria, to gain too much autonomy and so on, because there are a lot of Kurds in Turkey, and there's the danger that the Kurdistan, a new Kurdistan, which is currently split between, I think, about 5 countries, but a large part of it is in Turkey and a large part of it is in Syria. They don't want the new Kurdistan to arise to split Turkey and cause trouble for Turkey. So Turkey is backing this rebel group called Syrian National Army, SNA. And then there's a Syrian Democratic group, which is the Kurdish a side of the equation, and then there's another Syrian national coalition, which is various other opposition groups. So, but that whole cocktail of those organizations has taken over leadership in Syria, and they're trying to settle and somehow make a go of it, of that country, given all those various people. And we have, at least in the beginning, assurances that the leadership is trying to respect the rights of all the parties and trying to reach some sort of accommodation between the parties. With respect to outside countries, you mentioned Russia, of course.
Yep.
There's Iran that has their own interests in Syria, Turkey, and the United States. Now, Iran and Russia backed Assad, and in the civil war they backed him, and there was chemical warfare and everything, but they quashed the rebels for 7 years, I guess it was.
Yeah.
Until now, and now because the opposition has gained force, it appears that Russia and Iran have lost their influence in that area, although there has been a discussion online or in the media to the effect that Russia has not really lost what it wants in Syria, which is the warm water port and airport, but that it has essentially agreed with Turkey to allow Turkey to exert its influence over Syria in exchange for a peaceful continuation of its presence in Russia's presence in Syria in those two, the warm water port and the airport, which is basically the strategic thing they want.
Yeah.
And this view is based on Russia's interest in continuous attack on Ukraine and does not have the resources and time to continue a fight in Syria. So they're going to back off and allow Turkey to sort of exert its influence over Syria. And the United States, on its part, supports the Kurds in Syria and, of course, Israel. And okay, you got a good map there. That sort of
we have to have a map to have this conversation. I'm just realizing that because I've actually been looking at the map pretty closely the last number of days
right.
to get my geographical sense on where everything is, because I was shocked that Turkey borders Syria by so much and borders Iran and borders Iraq. It was a little interesting to me, but I'm bringing this up. Sure, if you're listening to this episode, check out the YouTube video. But go ahead, continue, please.
Yeah. So most recently, Israel has been bombing those places in Syria where there are arms and military places, trying to get rid of any bombs and military hardware that could be a threat to Israel. And they have occupied the Golan Heights part of Syria because that's a strategically important place from the point of view of protecting Israel from attacks from Syria. And also the Israelis have bombed Hezbollah in Lebanon and essentially cleaned Hezbollah out of Lebanon in terms of militarily defeating Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is tied into Iran and has also had an influence in Syria. So Syria is a cocktail of various groups who are vying with each other for power there. But it can be said that the influence of Russia in Syria and Iran in Syria has eclipsed and may have eclipsed because of either the rebels taking charge of Syria or in the case of Russia agreeing with Turkey, you take the lead in Syria, just leave our our little possessions intact, so we have our
Yeah.
access to the Mediterranean, etc.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So,
that's a brief outline of what's going on in Syria.
thank you. So, some thoughts. I was a poli sci major in college, so this has always been fascinating to me. And I got my certificate in international relations because I've always been fascinated, by these, hotspots around the world. So, whenever I think about Syria now, I think about the Balkans, and I think about how, man, this is like a powder keg waiting to explode because you have so many different actors, different interests. I don't think some people even know what their interests are, honestly, just because you don't know who ultimately, at the end of the day, you got Israel is, bombing, factories left and right, plants, equipment left and right, basically arguing that they don't want anybody getting any crazy ideas, right?
Yeah.
Lest they be attacked. You have Turkey with the whole Kurdistan thing. You have Iran, who just lost basically a land bridge to Lebanon. Um, and and I don't know what Iraq's role is in all of this, because Iraq is supposed to be an ally of the U.S. and it has the longest border with Syria. So, and but Turkey's supposed to be the U.S.'s ally as well. But now they're making deals with Russia. I just don't know what to make of it. I honestly don't. It's just
Well, it's you're right. It's hard to sort of figure out which way is up in this battle. But
yeah.
um, you mentioned the Balkans and that it's a powder keg. Well, that was exactly what it was when we were coming into World War One, I
Mhm.
guess.
Correct.
And back then Turkey was, the Ottoman Empire,
Hmm.
and it was one of the huge empires like Austro-Hungary, German, uh, the Ottoman
Yeah.
Empire, British Empire, etc. So there's a bit of that going on in this area. I just might mention that Georgia is another country that is up in arms because
Yeah.
its leaders have backed away from the Western European orientation,
Hmm.
and it's on the border with Russia, and indeed Russia's occupying certain parts of Georgia, and there's like millions of Georgians up in arms over this
Yeah.
this bad election that appears to have been rigged, and they're trying to, get back on track, so to speak. So, um, in terms of, let's say, from a global perspective, where are we headed? Uh,
Hmm.
One of the keys is what's happening with Trump in Washington. I think
Yeah.
that's a central question for all this stuff because, generally speaking, you could say that Trump's orientation with, the "Make America Great Again" and
Hmm.
"America First" has been very isolationist,
Hmm.
and so the theme of withdrawing from world events appears to be a popular theme in his camp,
Yeah.
and if with
No,
him,
he just published it actually recently. Trump just said, um, if America needs to stay out and let this thing just sort itself out. And I think that was on a Friday or maybe on a Saturday, because I know I was at the gym, and then on Sunday morning, Sunday mid morning, Biden came out and basically announced the U.S.'s position, which is, hey, this is what happened. And it's struck me because I thought, okay, you have the president elect is saying, this is not our problem. This is not our fight. No more money. We don't care what happens over there. And you got Biden coming out and saying, hey, we got to care about this. So I think that was the reason Biden came out and said it, right? Because,
yeah,
um,
there's this strain of isolationism has been with us in America for, well, before World War One and throughout the wars. And it seems like an intelligent thing to say, like it's their fight, it's not our fight, until it becomes our fight. Like Hitler was their fight, not our fight, and then all of a sudden Hitler's our fight. Japan was their
yeah.
fight. You know,
No, all people need to do is go listen or read Woodrow Wilson's speech in 1917.
yeah,
I was listening to it some time ago, and he laid out the reasons why the U.S. had to go in because of the vessels and the ships that were being attacked, by the German Empire at the time. And so he's like, look, we didn't want to get into this, but we kind of have no choice at this point.
Yeah.
So you never know how this is going to come back and connect back, to the mainland U.S.
We can applaud the fact that there's change in Syria. Look, Syria had, this civil war and so on drove out 6.8 million Syrians, 1 million of which showed up in Europe. And I got the numbers here somewhere. There was also about 6 million more who were displaced from their homes in Syria, a total of like 12 million people, affected by the war. Turkey got 3.5 million refugees from that. Lebanon, almost 1 million. Jordan, 650,000. Iraq, 250,000. Egypt, 140,000. But Europe got 1 million. And it's an argument to be made that this disruption of so many people and dislocation, including this refugee tidal wave, was in Putin's interest, because it destabilized Europe and caused Europe to start fighting over do we want refugees or we don't, and so on.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, the numbers are almost identical with Ukraine. Ukraine had 12 million people displaced, and about 6 million are now outside of Ukraine in Europe. And of that, 200,000 came to Canada, and about 150,000, I believe, or so, came to the United States. And there are projections, if the war goes bad in Ukraine, that it's possible that up to 20 million more refugees will show up in Western Europe. And of course, the pressure will be for them to come to the US and Canada, which will really turn things upside down. Now, I mean, it's we as human beings tend to, I don't know, we're either optimistic or pessimistic, and you could say, well, it's very pessimistic, which it is. Hopefully we won't see something that terrible. And there is hope that there will be some progress in Syria. There may be progress in Ukraine. The butchery that's been taking place in Israel, when 1,200 people were slaughtered, and the people were kidnapped or whatever and taken to Gaza, and the subsequent death of some, I think it's approaching 50,000 people in Gaza from the invasion by the Israeli army. I don't know. Something has to be done.
Yeah.
To I don't know, somehow clamp down on that.
Yeah, well, the killing needs to end, and I think a lot of it traces back to Iran, right?
Yeah.
And so because Iran and Russia are allied, this Syrian loss to them is a big deal. And
it is indeed. And I just throw in there, there's this little what would you call it? Kind of a little nest of people or organ of countries: Russia, Iran, North Korea. North Korea sent like over 10,000 troops to fight in Ukraine, which is crazy. Why would they do that? But I guess there's economic aid coming from Russia. It sent in an unbelievable amount of arms, North Korea, to help Russia in the war with Ukraine.
Yeah, that's the report.
So you got North Korea, you got Iran, you got Russia, and the other, Cuba and Venezuela and so on, lining up, and China. And the question is, only 5 years ago, it appeared that the world was headed towards democracy, and most nations were going in the direction of democracy. But in the last 5 years or so, the world has made an about face, and they seem to be marching in the opposite direction, with the rise in right-wing political groups in France, in Romania, and so on. Hungary's leader, and there just seems to be an about face in terms of where the world is headed. But there's also this is endless, Mac. This is endless. But anyway, India and China aren't best of buddies either. Well, India and Pakistan are not the best of buddies. So there's tension on those two fronts. It's significant if India and China developed any serious tension, because it could kind of upset the balance in terms of it's a counterweight of China against its cooperation with Russia. If President Xi of China called Putin and said, okay, that's it, cut that war, get the heck out of there, that would be the end of the war, I think. One phone call from Xi. But that's not the way things are going.
Yeah.
So,
well, everyone's holding their cards close to their chest because no one knows. Nobody knows the future. So therefore, I think going back to Trump, he was a while caught in a lot of this. Nobody knew who was going to win the election. And now that he's won, there's, to a degree, a little more certainty on where, because he was more, I think he was more clear, than the opposition in the U.S. about where his mind was. And so we'll see what happens the next couple of weeks. I mean, it's crazy to say that, but by January 1st, by January 20th, when he inaugurated, we'll see what happens to, what's going on in both of these hot spots around the world. But I do agree that China's been kind of quiet, though. I don't know if that's a good thing.
They've got interest in South China Sea and trying to expand
well, then again, maybe they've been doing a lot of things. I just haven't been keeping up because there's so much to keep track of. But okay, it's 37 after. We've been talking, and I tried to keep these episodes at 20 minutes, but we just got carried away with so much information. It's a lot of fun. I mean, I love talking to you about these things, and people who are listening, and watching should understand that. Well, certainly me, I'm not an expert on international relations, just have a natural interest in it. You have so much more knowledge than I do, but I think even you would say that you're not a specialist in these things. And so, and so when we talk, with curiosity, and we talk with hope that things will go for the better, and then and just discuss what our observations are. But we certainly, don't claim to know the absolutes on what should and shouldn't happen, and we can just wait and see, and we'll be back to talk more about it when it changes. All right. So, Andy Semotiuk, thank you so much for the conversation today, and we'll do it again. And Merry Christmas and all that, and Happy New Year's. It's December 11th, 2024, and so I'm just waiting on who's gonna be Time Magazine's Person of the Year. I always wait for that every year on this time, and then in terms of geopolitics, hopefully we'll get some peace in the new year. That's my hope.
Thanks very much for having me on again. I loved it, and it's a good conversation.
All right, we'll talk soon, and then everyone check out pacelawfirm.com. Okay, Andy, thank you so much.
Thank you.